Oh, Lazarus, here we go again. Confessions of an Illuminati. And it's not the first time you've heard that remarkable title. But this particular discussion is oriented at the remarkable Leo Zagami's latest opus, Islamic Freemasonry and Secret Societies Behind the Eternal Conflict in the Middle East. Now, Leo Zagami, as you well know, is an author, researcher, and former insider who draws from his unique involvement within the grip of the Illuminati. And Zagami has authored several books exploring, I think, in pioneering and somewhat historic detail, the intricate connections between secret societies, global politics, and religion. And his insider knowledge provides a rare glimpse into the hidden mechanisms which influences world events and your life and my life by extension. And today, we're looking into the complex web of secret societies and their influence on Islam and global conflicts. So really diving into the profound influence that Islam and Middle Eastern culture has had on the Freemasons and the so-called Illuminati. And we'll reveal the origins and impact of these covert connections and their role in shaping modern conflicts and ideology. From the Crusades to modern-day terrorism, the same complex. The hidden hand of secret societies has molded the course of history. And in Confessions of an Illuminati, Zagami reveals how Islamic mysticism and esoteric teachings have significantly influenced Western occultism. So this influence traces back to ancient civilizations like Egypt and Babylon, where concepts such as sacred geometry and numerology were shared between cultures. And these ideas eventually found their way into the various secret societies, including the Freemasons. Leo, it's an absolute delight to see you again, brother.
Thank you for having me on, and I guess you are in an ideal location to discuss all this, if you want to disclose it to our viewers. In any case...
Right, yes. Well, I'm in Istanbul, exactly right, in Turkey. So why is Istanbul the cradle of this historical conversation?
Absolutely. I mean, it's important to understand, for those who don't know the history, the rich history of Turkey, that Istanbul was for many centuries, 8 centuries, the capital of the Ottoman Empire. And under the Ottoman Empire, there was actually a quite balanced relation between people of different religions, people that, of course, predate the Seljuk Turks and maybe didn't convert to Islam, because we had a first phase, which was the Seljuk Turks, the Sunnis of Saladin, and then later on, of course, we had the establishment of the Ottoman Empire. But all this changed forever the history of the Middle East. Many of the countries that we see today in the Middle East didn't exist prior to the implosion of the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire itself was sabotaged left, right, and center by the Illuminati and the Western Freemasons, by the establishment of lodges all over their territory. And this is well described in my book that, as you know, includes also, for the first time, an image of something unusual that they don't want to show in Turkish museums, but is actually kept in a depot there in Istanbul. It's the cross, the secret cross that was discovered in the 1950s between Syria and Turkey in a Templar church. And this cross has actually Mohammed on it with a turban. And this cross is the original Baphomet, and this cross was given to me, sent to the image, of course, not the cross, which, like I said, is preserved in a depot in Istanbul, by the late Gabriele Mandelkhan, who was the head of the Sufi Gerai Helveti, who are quite known there in Turkey and quite popular. Now, let me show you here this image that you can see. Is very unusual to see, first of all, an image of Muhammad, because that's heretical in Islam to represent Muhammad. Right. And on top of that, to actually have him on a cross is even more heretic. Yeah. But to explain all this, of course, we can go through the phases of your interview where we will explain maybe the why we have it.
So that's perfect segue because we're talking about the birth of Islam and secret societies. So the first question really is if you could explain how Islam's origins were influenced by secret societies and what role in particular the Vatican play in this.
Okay, now in the first chapter of my book, I introduce Islam because this book might seem complex because of the topics that I touch, but I managed through years of research and also through citations that are credible for also for Muslims. In fact, I haven't received any criticism from the Muslim world until now. Actually, even the Sufis, which I have criticized openly in the book, they have been very complimentary to me. So I was quite shocked by that because I base this book on fact, not on fiction or speculation. So there has been a lot of talk for many years about the possibility that the Vatican was involved somehow in the foundation of Islam because of a gentleman, an alleged Jesuit called Alberto Rivera. But in the first chapter of my book, I explain how there was definitely some involvement of the Vatican from the early stages. But you have to remember, first of all, this religion, born in the 7th century in the Arabian Peninsula, was born in a territory which was typically connected to the Oriental churches, not to the Vatican Catholic. There wasn't yet such a division, but there was already starting to be a division between the Oriental churches and Rome, as you know. There was, of course, the Byzantium Empire that will lead to the establishment of the Orthodox faith that then was overtaken later on by the Ottoman Empire. In fact, Constantinople became then Istanbul. But why is so important the role of the secret societies? Because of the nature of Islam, the way it expanded from the Arabian Peninsula into the places which gave birth to the Illuminati, Egypt and Mesopotamia. Suddenly, this new kid on the block managed to expand, and everybody was like, how is it possible it's expanding so fast, especially in territories which had a very rich history predating Islam by thousands of years. So the whole thing needs to be explained so then people understand that Islam, a little bit like the Christian faith that became later on the official faith of the Roman Empire, absorbed a number of pre-existing Arabian deities. Mostly the most known deities were, of course, the ones connected to the moon, like Isis in Egypt, but then in Mesopotamia we had Sin, we had the goddess Sin, and this development meant that when the Islamic religion started to expand in these territories, the Illuminati that were born in those territories, they couldn't just be wiped out. So they started to compromise and create secretively societies that could include elements of the past with the new kid on the block, which was Islam. And at the same time, when we have, right after the death of Muhammad and the fourth caliph, Ali, who was the cousin married with his daughter, the birth of the Shiite Islam, Shia Islam became immediately interested in acts of being more covert because they had to hide from the Sunni certain things. So that's where the Sufis, the early secret societies that we now know as the Sufis, they were first established in the Shiite world, though later on they will also expand in the Sunni world. So all those pre-existing religions like Zoroastrians, Manichaeans, the Gnostics, they didn't simply disappear. They joined the Muslim world in a certain way. They joined covertly. In other ways, they were more open. Like, for example, in the city of Aran, which is today in Turkey, but it was founded by the merchants of the city of Ur, and it was, of course, a very important part of their of that tradition. Well, in the city of Haran, which has a very ancient, hermetic, and also a reverence towards the goddess Sin, they were invaded by the Muslims, and they were asked which religion they were, because the Muslims expanded, and when they arrived in a place which had Christians or Jews, they were simply tax them extra. They will not necessarily kill them. They might restrict their position within the society they belong. You know, they could maybe have certain important roles, but it wasn't always like this. Sometimes they did, as long as they paid this tax of not. So it happened that the Muslims at times, though, arrived in places where they were the pagans. Now, with the pagans, things were different, because they could be killed if they didn't convert. So with them, the approach was a little bit more violent. With the city of Haran, the people who live in the city, they were very skilled. They were very knowledgeable. So they said to the Caliph, who was a companion of the Prophet who had invaded them, said, well, let's just talk about our fate when you come back from the rest of your conquests. And in the meantime, you can understand that we are on the case. We have a lawyer working for us. So, I mean, they took out the figure of a lawyer back there, even in ancient times. The city of Haran said, our lawyer will look into it. So he went into the Quran, he looked into this Quran, and he saw that there was actually a name of, amongst the various religions mentioned in this book, the only ones really are the Christians and the Jews. There was, though, another group, the Sabaeans. And nobody knew who were the Sabaeans. So by the time the Caliph came back and he said, which religion are you? Well, we are in the book here. We are the Sabaeans. And so he said, who is your God? Hermete Trismegistus. So at that point, thanks to this escamotage, they managed to preserve Hermetica, which will have been forever lost, because then it kind of refiltered through the Moorish culture of south of Spain and back into Europe, and then for the Renaissance, as you know. So the elements that were being preserved were often, though, being labeled as Islamic inventions. Like today, we talk about algebra as being Islamic. We talk about algorithm because it comes from a guy, actually, this name comes from a Muslim guy. So we think, wow, the Muslims really invented a lot of stuff, even coffee. It's not so easy, the whole thing. I mean, yes, they preserved these things, but they actually got them while they were expanding from other cultures. And that is important. For example, algebra, originally elements came from the Hindu culture. So they were kind of absorbing them, elaborating them, and they created two very important renewed centers of knowledge that were an emanation of these secret societies. One will be the emanation of the Brethren of Sincerity, which became the Illuminati of the city of Haran, who arrived in Baghdad and gave birth to the House of Wisdom. The other one was still all the Zoroastrian, Manichaean, Buddhist, Gnostic tendency were elaborated within the House of Knowledge in Cairo, which was established in the year...
That was the next piece, right?
Yeah, in the year 1005, they established this outer expression of the Cairo Lodge. But like I said in my book, it pre-exists Islam because the knowledge in Cairo that they were elaborating within this lodge came from the Memphis school of the Illuminati, from Alexandria, which was home to the Gnostics and to the Illuminati, also because, like I explained in volume 9, the Gnostics were the ancestors of the Illuminati. They were the original Illuminati. So
what about the connection with the Druze faith of the Cairo Lodge?
That is another important connection. You see, at one point, one of the Fatimid caliphs was persecuting the Sunnis, because let's remember that in the first few centuries of Islam, there was a lot of chaos in this religion, first of all, which didn't have a centralized power like Rome to decide on the future of it. So the Shia Islam expanded like never before in their history, and never again in their history, because as you know, these days they are restricted to Iraq and Iran. They expanded through the Fatimid dynasty that established Cairo, which was called Al-Qaeda. And so they established Cairo. There was this lodge which pre-existed, which of course analyzed when Islam arrived, for example, in Persia or in Egypt, the Illuminati, they took the Quran and they said, well, I'm not really impressed with this thing, but we can make it work. So that was the thing. Religion as a tool to manipulate the masses. That was from the very beginning the role of Islam. While instead within their inner circles, they were, you know, rich in culture, taking from the ancient Greek philosophers the knowledge of Hermetica, the knowledge of the Gnosis. So they had a different approach. So in the Fatimid dynasty, the sixth caliph will become the starting figure of something that, I mean, still to this day is shocking for people to understand that a man could have all this influence and still be relatively unknown to most people. This guy was Al-Hakim bin Arla, and he was born in 985, died in 1021. He was known, why? Because he was waging this war against the Sunnis, but at one point he decided to instead retaliate against the Jews and the Christians. Now, the Fatimid dynasty had been very much integrated with the Jews. And actually, a lot of the knowledge that we have of the Fatimids comes from one of the synagogues in Cairo. So, this just to give you an example. But this guy was a terrible figure. This guy, he went from persecuting the Sunnis to persecuting the Christians and the Jews, destroying the synagogues, destroying their churches, and then he was inside the lodge. He said, the only law here is science. The religion, the bigotry of religion, as he described it, was for the outside world. But this guy was really oppressing people with a Sharia that made Cairo into a hellish place where nobody could party, nobody. So he was an hypocrite. Let's say very, you know, because he was pushing everything that he didn't really believe in. And at one point, he became a almost godly figure for a number of Shia Ismaili sects, such as the Nizari. The Nizaris are the Ashashins, basically, after, and the Mustalis, and also the Druze. So these religions were born because at one point, their religious leaders decided that this caliph was almost like Muhammad or Ali, because Ali, as you know, the Shiites regard him as an equally important figure, and that he was a godly figure. He was the god of reason, this guy in their eyes had become. Now, it's very interesting because then when his successor will come, his son will come in, he will actually persecute the followers of his father, who took his father as almost a godly figure, saying, you are completely in the wrong, you are a heretic with what you're doing. And that's what brought the conflicts with the Nizaris, brought the Druze to expatriate and eventually find their ideal location initially in Lebanon and also in Syria. So the history of Al-Hakim is controversial. One night he was walking along the roads of Cairo, and he was probably killed brutally, but he was made to disappear because he was such a godly figure. They couldn't just say, oh, the guy pissed off the whole of Cairo and he was killed because he was an asshole. It wasn't really, it will not fit into the scheme of things. Because the histories around him are somehow controversial. And we don't really know what happened to his body. He was described, though, his critics described him as the Nero of Egypt. So imagine that, the Nero of Egypt, a terrible figure. And you see,
that's like Antichrist status.
yes, absolutely. Antichrist. In fact, he moved against the Christians like a real Antichrist. The other thing, though, that of course is important is that he also established officially the House of Knowledge, which became this competitor to the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. So he also had this, he wanted to be remembered as a man of great culture. Let's not forget that if Cairo is still to this day the home of all meetings in the Middle East regarding the future of the Middle East between the head of the CIA, the head of Shin Bet, the head of Mossad, the head of the Qataris, the head of this and that, is because Cairo retains this important role. Cairo eventually, the Fatimid dynasty will fail and will disappear. And the Sunnis, the Seljuk Turks of Saladin will take over the show, and Egypt will never again be a Shia place. However, this Shiite element, it's still there. It's not like it went away, because it's not about only the Shia. It's about this, like I said, the Zoroastrians, the Manichaeans, the Gnostics, the pre-existing cults of Isis. It's all included. And so when, for example, this Shia religion failed, and it was more and more restricted by their Sunni competitors, they became more and more aggressive. And that's with the Nizari assassins, that with the old man of the mountain on top of this fortress in Alamut. And of course, that was inspirational, though, for the Vatican. The Vatican saw that from the very start this religion was fragmented. This religion, they say, was originated by the Vatican, but the figure that this Alberto Rivera claimed, the Cardinal Bea told them originated Islam, was the cousin of the first wife of Muhammad, Khadija. Khadija was a rich widow who Muhammad married, so he could then dedicate himself to what he liked to do, which was channeling this angel Gabriel in a cave outside of Mecca, which took a number of years. So, but how did he get inspired? He got inspired by the cousin of his Khadija, and this cousin was actually an Ebionite priest. Now, Ebionite is a specific sect within the Jewish world. They are Christians, but they didn't accept the divinity of Jesus, and like we have in Islam. So many elements of the Ebionite priesthood were reflected in early Islam. And we can say that the cousin of Khadija died before the whole Quran was delivered. But they all said that, even the prophet, that he will have a special place into heaven, this important figure. So the statement that was then made by Cardinal Bea and then picked up by Rivera and then picked up, of course, in those comic strips, in particular The Prophet, which became very popular because it talked about Vatican founding Islam, we can say that lacks in credibility, because an Ebionite priest is not a Vatican priest. It's definitely not a Vatican priest. And like I said earlier, these territories mostly depended on the Oriental churches that didn't really get along with the Vatican back then, and still to this day, the Coptic Church doesn't get along with the Vatican. Just the other day, they interrupted all relations because they think that what the Pope is doing is completely heretic. Rightly so, because the Pope today, Pope Bergoglio, is an heretic. So with Al-Qaim bin Amra Allah, we have the birth, paradoxically, of a number of other faiths, because the Nizaris still to these days exist. They might not be any longer the Ashashins. They kind of integrated the Aga Khan. Currently, the fourth Aga Khan is their leader. and it's, of course, they are known as the money lenders of Islam. At least this is what Edith Starr Miller said. Now, Edith Starr Miller, together with Nesta Webster 100 years ago, were probably the last people to talk about the Sky Lodge, because to my knowledge, nobody has touched on this subject any longer. I was myself lucky enough to go and work and visit Cairo and research the subjects, thanks to the Boutros Ghali family, which are protectors of the Coptic Church many years ago in 2003. And that will eventually lead me to becoming connected to Islam and even taking on a Muslim name, Khaled Saifullah Khan. So this is just briefly for those people who are following me. My involvement became a very important involvement, because I became involved with a descendant of Prophet Muhammad, and I produced a child to be an heir to this alliance which were forged between the Western and the, let's say it wasn't forged because it was already there. It has been there for centuries. And that was really led also to 9/11. When you say the Druze, you're talking about a religion that has inspired, for example, the Shriners here in America. The guy who was called Albert Leighton Rawson, the co-founder of the Shriners, formerly known as the Ancient Order of the Nobles of the Mystic Shrine, all those weirdos that go around with the fezzes in the American cities, and they also do a lot of good for children in hospitals and stuff.
Oh, do they?
Well, they have to do something good sometimes. Huh? But in any case, and they dress up as clowns and they do all that kind of stuff. But the Shriners themselves, this Albert Leighton Rawson is important because he was one of the few Westerners who was ever initiated into the Druze cult. The Druze operate as an esoteric kind of group. It's not like a normal religion. You have initiations, you have phases of these initiations, and they all come like the Nizari Ashashins. Also, the Nizaris had that kind of different stages in the Nizari apprenticeship to mastership and all that. And who was initiated in the Cairo Lodge? Ashani Sabah, the founder of the Ashashins that inspired themselves the Templars. Because you have to understand one concept, it's very important here. Around the year 1000, the Vatican, of course, had been playing on the different Islamic sects, one against the others, so they could always rule by the divide and conquer, divide et impera, which is, as you know, a ancient Roman motto, comes from Julius Caesar. So, I mean, it's obvious that the Vatican is their heirs, no? So they saw that it was kind of easy to put them against each other, but at the same time, they saw that the Fatimid branch was expanding in the south of Italy, and I come from Sicily, and Sicily for 3 centuries was an emirate under these people. So my surname, Zagami, is Persian, comes from Zagam. So the place where part of my family comes from is at this little island in front of Sicily called Ali Kudi, which is the Rock of Ali, Ali Kur. So it's when the Shiites are the first to take control of attempting to take control of some parts of Sicily were the Sunnis. It was actually a companion of the Prophet. But later on, when the Shiites took control of almost the whole of south of Italy and established the Emirate of Sicily, well, that was a big thing. That was a big thing. That was like they forced into circumcision 3,000 children in one day. And that was brutal because you could have infections back then and stuff. So that was brutal. They were brutal in the way they wanted to convert churches into mosque. And then the mosque, of course, once they were kicked out, once the Fatimid dynasty imploded themselves, and somehow they were kind of helped by the Sunni expansion, the Vatican could breathe again. But it was the Normans, as you know, the that came and conquered at that point and made their home in Sicily, the great emperors of the Sacred Roman Empire. So all this historical background is important for where we are now. That's
So
why
let
the
me
Islamic... Yes, please.
Let me jump in a little bit.
Yeah.
So in the first instance, I lived in Egypt for a number of years, and for the very reasons you mentioned, that it is historically the center ground for actually global diplomacy. I mean, the missions in Cairo are legend. Every country is represented in Cairo, all the plenipotentiaries and ambassadors. And for a number of years, I was doing my diplomatic work. I met also with Knights of Malta and what have you. They all have their enclaves and strongholds there. I had some fascinating meetings. I'm talking 25 years ago. So I understand that context. I also spent some real considerable time with the Coptic bishops in the desert of Scetis in Wadi al-Natrun. At that time, under military purview, I was allowed to enter, and I spent some time there. So I understand much of that, what you're referring to. You need to reconcile something for me, and I'm sure a lot of people listening in. I grew up on Sufi geometry and poetry. Rumi was there is so much about Sufism, the mystical tradition of Islam being Sufism, that is profoundly poignant and beautiful at its essence and at its root. So when we talk about the darker aspects of Sufism and its context, which I want you to speak to, the context and significance of Sufism in the context of the one world religion and its relation to the Antichrist, like we've just been speaking. I'm having a hard time reconciling.
In general, so Sufism today is covering up for a lot of stuff. And even at the time of Aleister Crowley, he was initiated into a Sufi group operating in Northern Africa and Egypt known as Aisawa. Aisawa then became an anagram, Aivas, which was his supposed entity that communicated to him this book of the law. He wanted himself to be passed as a Muslim and wanted to go to Mecca desperately because he was trying. They, of course, discouraged him and he ended up not going because they said, you will never pass as a Muslim. And as you know, if you enter Mecca as a non-Muslim, you will be automatically killed. So Sufism might seem, my son is called Isaac Rumi, and he was born in that context. But I saw the lies of the Sufis. I saw the reality of the Sufis that I expose in this book. And it's not only about today and what they're doing within the context of a one-world religion, which, of course, we can, people like this that everybody likes because of his words. The heart of Sufism, Hazrat Inaya Khan, is a typical example of that syncretism. The Sufis have always promoted the religious syncretism, and for that reason, they are at the heart of the one world religion which is being established for the Antichrist. And when the Pope established the very recent alliance, human fraternity document, which was signed, as you know, in Dubai in the early 2019 with the Imam of Al-Azhar, so from Egypt, that gave birth to this project, which is expanding. So from the Sunni world, then the Pope, after Fratelli Tutti, the encyclica, he went to Iraq in the middle of the pandemic, and he also brought this message to the Shiite world and did a specific celebration in the city of Ur. So that is also connected to the Illuminati. Sufism is a great idea, but the problem is that often, and I must say in the last 3 centuries, almost all the times we hear about Sufism is connected with Freemasonry from the Western world that found their ideal alliance with the Sufis. Okay?
Absolutely fascinating for me to hear this. Yeah, I'm very. And where does the protocols of the learned elders of Zion and Islam intersect here with
intersect with this? I can show you the book that I cite also in my own book. The Secret Practices of the Sufi Freemasons, which is the Islamic Teachings at the Heart of Alchemy by Baron Rudolf von Sembotendorf, founder of the Thule Gesellschaft Lodge, which initiated Adolf Hitler. He was initiated in Salonico. You see, when the Western Illuminati and Freemasons created British Israelism, and they will eventually
Is this Balfour Declaration and all of that?
Precedes it by over 100 years. It gets us to the very heart of the problem that generates after the Balfour Declaration, which at the moment, of course, we see as the starting point of Israel, but it's not the starting point. The starting point was a long time before. Now, we have to understand that, of course, the Jews always wanted to go back to the Promised Land. That's okay. But during the Ottoman Empire, everybody within the Ottoman Empire, like I said, aside from the fact that they might have to pay an extra tax for not being Muslim, and for some people, let's say the people who didn't care about their faith, they converted automatically. They said, I don't want to pay an extra tax. It's like the IRS coming here. Do you want to convert or you want to pay the tax? I will say, okay, well, I have to bend down 5 times a day to make, who cares? I'm not going to pay the tax. So it was an increase in number of converts also for that reason. I know it might seem a bit not good for those Muslims who are watching us, but this is a reality. You know, if you come with this kind of proposal. However, the Islamic teachings merged with British Israelism and what became really a very important mix that then will give birth with the Sabbateans. The Sabbateans, though, Shabbatai Zevi, his father was a British agent. Like we have a lot of researchers these days that talk about the Sabbatean Frankists. But not very many. The Sabbateans are the ones, for those who are following us who don't know this, they are the heretics within Judaism. From the city of Smyrna in Turkey, where you are, this Jew called Shabbatai Zevi started to convert people to the idea that he was the Messiah. He didn't really want to reveal he was the Messiah, but once he met another guy who would become his John the Baptist figure, is Nathan of Gaza, from Gaza. Now, Nathan of Gaza will eventually bring the holy city of the Sabbateans in Gaza, cursing that place forever. That city was already cursed because it had been in the hands of the Knights Templars, and it had been, unfortunately, attacked in the same vicious way by the Muslims 800-900 years ago, when they were attacking the Templars who were living there. And they couldn't keep in their fortress all the people, Jews and Christians, so then they got slaughtered by the Muslims. So what comes around goes around, remember that, in the history of things. I'm saying that to the Muslims who this day are crying, cry, yes, 800, 900 years ago, you were the ones doing the same things. Remember that. So just to be very exact about things, because in my book, I don't take sides. I simply show that there is no Christian, no Jew, or no Muslim that can go on a mountain and say, I have the truth and I'm above you because my ethics and my morals are superior. No.
Bravo.
First of all, the Vatican shouldn't have probably even started the Crusades. But unfortunately, because of what the Muslims were doing by invading south of Italy, it was becoming a little bit too close. And during the course of the first few centuries, Islam demonstrated to have no respect for the boundaries that were set by the Vatican. So the Vatican at one point sent their emissaries in Syria, in particular today's Syria, and understood how Islam was operating. In particular, they understood the concept of ribat. Now, ribat is a very important concept. Today, unfortunately, it's been bastardized and used by ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and all the Salafi jihadists. But the original ribat concept was to protect the pilgrims going to Mecca and Medina, or Jerusalem, and protect them with these fortresses that will also guest the people who were fighting the jihad.
Yeah.
And when around the year 1000, the Pope will eventually decide to move And it will take time. It will take several popes to finally say, okay, let's go and do this crusade. But the crusades, they had to be based on the concept of holy war, which was completely, it was completely foreign to the Christians. Jesus never said to fight any holy war with swords, cutting people's throats and converting them with force. When it happened, it wasn't because Jesus ever said that. So we know that maybe, especially in Scandinavia, and that was sad, it happened. The Christians were very forceful. But however, when it comes to the Middle East, when the Vatican decided to intervene, and they had to establish their knighthoods, the Knight of the Holy Sepulchre, the Knights Templar, the Teutonic Knights, and then, of course, the Knights Hospitaliers, you mentioned the Knights of Malta later on. These knighthoods had to be inspired by a holy war. So they took the concept of Ribat and they staged a holy war. And they created also these knighthoods that were based, especially the Knights Templars, on groups like the Assassins.
Yeah, yeah.
So they inspired themselves. So it's a little bit paradoxical. Today we have in Turkey or in the Middle East people, the Crusaders, the Crusaders, the Crusades. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, study this book, and there has not been any Muslim scholar debunking it, because you created that concept that then influenced the Crusades. So you are the ones who basically dig your own grave, and you can't then cry, they come after us. Well, you inspired them. So we have to be very always, because I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to say the Christians are right, because they shouldn't have probably done that. But the Muslims themselves shouldn't have done the same thing, expanding by force in Christian territories. And then the Jews, when the Sabbateans were established with Shabbatai Zevi, that was the moment in which, in 1666, everybody was expecting the Antichrist.
Yes.
And instead, in 1666, Shabbatai Zevi, because the Sultan tell, we're going to kill you if you don't convert to Islam, he went outwards and said, I convert to Islam. So the guy converted to Islam and was given actually a nice treatment by the Sultan, who then at that point treated them with gloves. Really, it was an asset for the Ottoman Empire to have this. Yeah. What happened, though, was that they created the Domme. The Domme are crypto-Jews, because from that moment onwards, Shabbatai Zevi had almost half of the people, of the Jewish people living in Europe, following him. And we're talking in the range of millions here of people following.
Really?
Yeah. He had over 1 million followers, and that was half of the Jewish population back then.
Wow.
Okay. But when he converted to Islam, of course, he lost most of the people in the Jewish world who said, this guy's a joke, you can't convert to Islam. But not everybody. Some of them stayed as the Domme. They stayed. So
went underground, basically.
They went underground. They became part of the Turkish culture. Ataturk was one of them, the father of modern Turkey. They say that even Erdogan partly is probably partly one of them. But the Domme culture established also a very close link with the Bektashi and with the Freemasons. And in that link, we find the connection with Rudolf von Bottendorf, because a family of Domme, Jews from Salonico, initiated him not only in the Rite of Memphis, which was this rite which the French had, French Sabbati. We are talking also about the Sabbatian Frankists creating Masonic rites after their establishment. And one of their great creation was both the Memphis and the Mizraim. These two so-called Egyptian rites, in reality, they should be called Jewish Sabbatian rites. And they expanded very much these rites in the Ottoman territory. Immediately, they found a lot of people in Egypt, a lot of lodges, and they expanded under the French, because with Napoleon came Freemasonry, speculative Freemasonry to Egypt. And in all of North Africa, Freemasonry, of the Western Freemasons.
Sorry, what did you mean by speculative Freemasonry? Forgive me, Leo.
Speculative Freemasonry starts in 1717 because it's no longer considered operative. Operative means we are actually building a church, building a building, something. No? Speculative means to speculate around the concept and making it an allegory also for people who were not constructors, they were not architects. People, as you know, from all of society will be initiated into this and taking, of course, the symbology of it. Now, the dark side of Sufism is very dark. And I know that we all like Jalaluddin Rumi, we like the poetry that he did and all that. But when you go and see who are these great figures of Sufi Islam, well, then we find some pretty dark figures, including Mansur al-Alaj, which is found in the initiations of the OTO of Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley, when he wrote his own rituals for the OTO, and he had to substitute suddenly Hiram Abif because the Freemasons here in America said that the rituals were too similar. The OTO had too similar to Masonic rituals. He used Islam. He used two figures, Mansur al-Alaj and Saladin. And it's a little bit paradoxical because the son of Saladin ended up killing Mansur al-Alaj, cutting his head, but his head became secretly worshipped by the Sufis and by the Knights Templars together with that cross which I showed you, the original Baphomet. The original Baphomet wasn't, is actually Mohammed, means Mohammed. And the Baphomet that instead we see paraded with like this by Eliphas Levi, who was a Sabbatean, who actually had embraced the occultism because of the Sabbatean Frankists. Well, Eliphas Levi is creating an hermetical concept in that drawing, which now it's paraded by the Satanic Temple around the capital of Israel. But the original Muhammad on the cross, which I showed you, is also hermetical because Muhammad never went on the cross. The cross is rather a symbol of something else, of the four elements. The turban is a symbol also. Mansur al-Alaj says, in my turban, I have all the truth of God. I have all the truth. It's a symbol. And so when I was initiated in the OTO, I had this incredible experience because I thought that I was initiated into, yes, a paramasonic organization that was fueled with Egyptian elements. Because when we study Crowley, it's all the ancient Egypt, the Horus, Osiris, and then Isis. It's all Egyptian stuff. So you don't imagine anything Islamic. But instead, when I was taken off the blindfold on the Minerval degree, suddenly I see this conic, this tent that is supposedly in the middle of the desert. And the figure, all dressed in white with a turban, was supposed to be Saladin, welcoming me in the OTO. So I was like, literally, when they took the blindfold, I was surprised. I tell you, because you start hearing the things they tell you when you say blindfolded, and it's about ancient Egypt. You're given a word which is On, supposed to be the god, the sun god, Osiris, the secret name On. And so you are like, and then suddenly, choo, and the guy is a Muslim in front of you, and you are like, then they tell you to turn around. And when you turn around, you have all the people wearing all their
aprons.
It's in the OTO, they have aprons, and they have also this black thing they wear on top. So it was kind of fascinating. But later on, when I went through the degrees, in the third degree...
What year was this, Leo? What year was this?
This was at the end of the 90s.
Okay.
And early 2000s. And so when I went through the degrees and I arrived to the third degree, then it was even more fascinating because suddenly, and I was a Freemason already, I had been initiated into Freemasonry, but I saw the resemblance with the Hiram Abif figure of this, but we are here to commemorate Mansur al-Halaj around this grave. I was a little bit puzzled by this whole thing. Yet another Muslim figure, a guy who had been very controversial within Islam, whose head had been chopped off, but the wife of the caliph wanted to preserve the head because it was so miraculous they wanted to keep it. So it was really weird stuff. But it definitely confirmed that the OTO under Aleister Crowley, in fact, later on, it was known as the OTO, today is known as the OTO Caliphate. And that caliphate is not simply because Crowley wanted to make a joke about Californian caliphs. It is a name, but it's also because there is this actual link with Islam. And the dark side of Sufism inspired Crowley. The Sufis today, when we go and see what's happening in Pakistan, they are the less tolerant people ever.
Yeah.
In some parts of the West, though, especially when we are engaging with people from the New Age milieu, let's say, they have this romanticized version of Sufism. And it was pushed by the Freemasons from the very early days.
I'm one of them, Leo, and that's why I'm saying I need to reconcile in my own head. I grew up in the 70s and 80s on Rumi poetry, and then I studied Sufic geometry, and I have a great love affair of Sufic architecture, geometry, and the arts. So for me, I'm having a hard time reconciling with the heart.
Yeah, but I make a question. Where is this art really coming from? Is it coming from Islam?
Probably from the Vedas and from Persia and from other
ancient Greece.
Right.
The philosophy. I mean, in the end, it's like they have absorbed a lot of stuff. There was definitely an Islamic golden age. That is a fact. But now it's barbarism. So how did we go from Islamic golden age to the situation we have now? And in my book, I explain how just before Crowley came around, the Theosophical Society and Madame Blavatsky connected with a very influential guy who will basically lead to the foundation of modern Islam. His name is Jalaluddin al-Afghani.
Yes.
Now, al-Afghani, the name itself, wow, it seems, and he goes around with a turban, and Jalaluddin al-Afghani, you can see him on the internet. He looks like a typical Taliban. And so because of the surname al-Afghani, he will also sell himself to the Egyptians as a Sunni.
Right.
It was complete disinformation. The guy who had two British handlers, he came from Persia, so he was not from Afghanistan. He was a Shiite in origin, but he was presenting himself as a Sunni. He arrived in Egypt and in the matter of 10 years created the most powerful Grand Lodge with 300 members in several lodges. He had been initiated into the Eastern Star Lodge in Cairo there, because the Illuminati at that point in the 19th century, they were really fascinated. There was one side of the Illuminati which was fascinated with British Israelism, which meant they saw the Brits as the lost tribe of the Israelites. And they were publishing books like this one. I show you, this is a very rare book. Actually, this is very rare because it was in a library of a very important person, Korzybinski. I don't know if you know, of course, Korzybinski is a guy that is often referred as the father of neurolinguistics. But this is his own copy from his own library, you see?
Wow.
And this book that you can see here, watch. The Anglo-Israel, the Saxon race, proved to be the last tribes of Israel. There was like, they were pushing this kind of truth because on the contrary, you see, on the contrary of Germany, on the contrary of France, Great Britain, the United Kingdom have created a complete alliance with the Jewish world, and especially with the Sabbatean world. It was Dr. Falk who inspired the Cagliostro, who was in London, Dr. Falk, who inspired Swedenborg, and Dr. Falk was also one of the first people who inspired what would become British Israelism. British Israelism, that's why when you said the Balfour Declaration earlier, I said this is a story that starts a long time before. It starts even before they coined the Zionist term. It starts with the Alliance Israélite Universelle of Adolphe Crémieux in France, who became the lawyer after the infamous Damascus affair in Syria, which in the 1850s generated the first case of Jewish persecution. Because, like I said, during the Ottoman Empire, for centuries, we had a relative peace. People lived tolerating each other, and there was no problem.
Yeah.
But once the Ottoman Empire was also British Israelism was connected with the fall of the Ottoman Empire in a way, because the Ottoman Empire had to be sabotaged by France and England to get to the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916 and then 2 years later to the Balfour Declaration. They had to eliminate the Ottoman Empire to arrive, and they created the basis for the problems of today. Countries like Jordan didn't exist.
Yeah.
Countries like Iran didn't exist because in 1979 they came along with this Republic of Iran before there was the Shah. The Pahlavi, but that is another important element because after the Second World War, Iran became the center of the Illuminati in the Middle East and the center of Freemasonry in the Middle East. But the first lodge that restarted after the first Pahlavi didn't like Freemasonry because he saw the Iranians as Aryans that needed to be in line with the Nazis and the fascists against Freemasonry. When the Pahlavi, the second and last Pahlavi, because after that, he ended up in January 1979 having to flee the country. Now, when in there was a coup aided by the CIA in the early 50s in Iran, but that coup would not have been possible without the help of this Masonic lodge, which was established with a direct connection to the Cairo Lodge. So it's so connected, and it's a web of lies, of connections, of manipulations. All these Sufi groups, all these Islamic schools are very confusing for the Western mind. So in my book, I tried to make it a little bit more simple so you can gradually go through the whole thing. Like, for example, when I said Crowley loved Islam, there was Illuminati who loved Islam before Crowley, who died even before Crowley became initiated. The Sir Richard Francis Burton. Have you ever heard of him?
Yes.
Now, in 1853, this guy disguised himself as an Islamic pilgrim and made the trek into the heart of Arabia, visiting the holy city of Mecca.
That's right.
Yeah, but later on, he became also a member of the Theosophical Society. Madame Blavatsky, before establishing the Theosophical Society in 1875, learned to smoke copious amounts of hashish in Cairo and gave birth to another secret society briefly in 1872. But then with all the smoking, she channeled all these books from the demons, whatever demons she had. And in any case, Jamaluddin al-Afghani, the guy that I told you that was so influential why is he so influential? Because his disciple became the founders of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood founded is the one that created Salafi jihadism, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hamas. It's crazy to think that the actual founder of this Salafi movement was himself an Illuminati who hung around with Madame Blavatsky and guested in his house in Paris.
Just extraordinary. And this opens up, like you say, a complete Pandora's box. And we have to revisit all that we think we know about so many of these traditions. Look, I'm just thinking, I've got a hard stop because I'm in Istanbul because I have to visit intensive care. I have family who's in real trouble. and I have to literally leave in 5 minutes, in fact, in 2 minutes. But what I'm thinking, I'm so excited by this conversation, Leo, because it's challenged a lot of my misconceptions and preconceptions. Beyond that, I would also like to actually have another session because, as you said, but I want to read the book. I need to get it. I need to read it because I'm fascinated by everything that we've brought out today. Leo Zagami.
I think you will, once you read the book, you will have more questions and also an understanding of what I'm trying to do here. And I think you will be very satisfied because this book is actually a book that wants to bring peace through self-criticism. It's not possible for a Muslim or a Jew or a Christian to finally enter a dialogue with all this weight without really knowing our own responsibilities as Christians, as Muslims, as Jews. This is what this book is about. It's about confronting your own demons.
I get it. I get it. And it's perfectly timed. Thank you. Beautiful. Brother Leo Zagami, thank you so very much. Thank you.